first act of breaking free from the past is not letting go of it. That is a common misconception, that freedom from the past means releasing it, forgetting it, putting it behind you. That kind of release, pursued prematurely, doesn't free you. It just buries what needs to be examined. And buried things do not stay buried. They surface later, in forms you don't recognize and can't address. The first act is extraction. Pulling out of every painful experience in your past every single piece of intelligence it contains. Making the experience functional. Making it earn its place in your story by yielding something real, something concrete, behavioral, forward useful, before you are done with it. Here is the distinction that matters. There is a difference between the emotional residue of an experience and the intelligence it contains. The emotional residue is the pain, the shame, the bitterness, the lingering anxiety. All of it is real, all of it is valid, and none of it, by itself, moves you forward. The intelligence is the actual information the experience produced. The specific understanding of reality that you now have because of what happened that you would not have had without it. Every painful experience in your past contains intelligence. Not because pain is good or because suffering builds character in some automatic way, it doesn't. But because reality was showing you something through those events. Through the failure, reality was showing you where your strategy was wrong, where your preparation was insufficient, where your model of how things work was inaccurate. Through the betrayal, reality was showing you what warning signs you had ignored, what your own needs were that weren't being met, what standards you had failed to hold. Through the painful chapter, reality was showing you what you actually value, because you felt its absence. The practice of intelligence extraction is precise and deliberate. You take a specific experience, one you've been carrying as weight, and you examine it not with the question, why did this happen to me, but with the question, what does this tell me about how things actually work? Not what is wrong with me that this happened, but what did I not yet understand that I understand now? Not a why did they do this, but what did this reveal about what I need to do differently? It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. In the same way, it is not the experience that defines the man, but what the man draws from the experience and carries forward as his own. The output of this examination needs to be specific. Genuinely, behaviorally specific. Not I learn to trust myself more, that's too vague to be actionable. More like, I learned that when I feel a persistent low-level unease in a situation and I override it to keep the peace, the thing I was uneasy about almost always turns out to be exactly the problem. My instincts are more reliable than my politeness. And from now on, when I feel that unease, I name it instead of suppressing it. That is intelligence. That changes behavior. That changes outcomes. Once you've extracted the intelligence, genuinely, specifically, with behavioral implications you can actually act on, something interesting happens to the experience. It changes texture. It moves from being a wound to being a resource. It moves from being something that happened to you to something that equipped you. It doesn't stop being something that happened. It doesn't stop having been painful. But its relationship to your present shifts. It becomes past tense in the truest sense. Not because you forced yourself to forget it, but because it has given everything it has to give. The transaction is complete. The debt is paid. You can release it now, not because you're trying to move on, but because you have genuinely moved on. You took what it had to offer and you went. Go through your inventory. Every weight you named in the last video. Every experience that is still occupying present tense space in your mind. Extract the intelligence from each one. Write it down. Make it specific. Make it behavioral. Make it actionable. And then, only then, ask yourself if you still need to carry this. Or if you can finally, legitimately, put it down. Drop this in the comments, my past has given me everything it has. I take it and I go. Part 2. Becoming the author. You've extracted intelligence from your past experiences. Now we need to address the stories. The narratives that have been running your identity, the past tense descriptions of yourself that are still directing present tense behavior. Because intelligence extraction deals with the event level. What we're about to do deals with the meaning level. And the meaning level is where identity lives. Machiavelli wrote that the most effective leaders he observed shared one quality above all others: they refused to be defined by circumstances they could not control. They took the circumstances, defeat, betrayal, exile, failure, loss, and they made a deliberate choice about what those circumstances meant and what role they would play in the leader's forward strategy. They were the authors of the meaning. Not the circumstances. Not history. Not the people who had harmed them. That is narrative authorship. And it is available to you in exactly the same way. Here is how it works in practice. You take the story you've been telling, the one you identified in the last video, the central narrative, the defining interpretation, and you examine it with a specific, honest question: is this the only story available from these facts? Because in most cases, the answer is no. The same events can be interpreted in multiple ways. Multiple stories can be built from the same raw facts. And the story you've been telling is not the only one, it is simply the one you settled on. The rewrite does not mean pretending the bad things were good. It does not mean false optimism or manufactured meaning. It means finding an interpretation of your actual history that is honest, that acknowledges the difficulty, and that positions you as an active protagonist who responded to adversity rather than a passive subject to whom adversity simply happened. The difference between "I lost everything in that collapse" and "I survived a complete collapse and rebuilt from nothing" is not the facts are identical. The difference is the protagonist's posture. The first sentence is something done to you. The second is something you did. Both are true. Only one of them gives you anything to build from. Fortune is a woman, and it is necessary, if you wish to master her, to conquer her by force. She allows herself to be overcome by bold men rather than by those who proceed coldly. Therefore, always advance as one who has decided who they are, and not as one who is still waiting for their history to tell them. The specific technique for narrative rewriting is this. Start with the central painful event or chapter. Write down the story you have been telling about it, in its full, unedited form. Then identify the protagonist's posture in that story. Are they active or passive? Are they the person making choices, or the person having choices made for them? Are they defined by what happened, or responding to what happened? Now rewrite it, with the same facts, but with an active protagonist. A protagonist who survived. Who learned. Who was changed by the experience, yes, but who was not broken by it. Who emerged with something they didn't have before, even if what they paid for it was too high. A protagonist who, looking back from now, can trace a line between that painful chapter and who they have become, and can see that who they have become is not despite that chapter but partially because of what that chapter required of them. This is not spin. It is not lying to yourself. It is the more complete and more honest version of the story. Because the version that has only the pain and the loss and the damage is also incomplete. It leaves out your survival. It leaves out your adaptation. It leaves out the person who is here right now, having come through whatever came. That person, who came through, is the most important character in your story. And most people's current narrative barely mentions them. Write that character in. Give that character their full presence in your story. Because that character, you, right now, having survived everything you've survived, is the actual foundation of everything you're going to build next. Drop this in the comments: I rewrite the story. And in the new version, I survive. I grow. I build. Part 3: Rewiring your behavioral patterns. We have addressed the past at the level of events, extracting intelligence. We've addressed it at the level of meaning, rewriting the narrative. Now we need to address it at the level of behavior. Because the loop we described in the first video, the self-reinforcing cycle that generates present confirmation of past conclusions, lives at the behavioral level. And until the behavior changes, the loop keeps running regardless of how much your thinking has shifted. This is the part most self-improvement content gets wrong. It focuses entirely on mindset, on thinking differently, on believing differently, and treats behavioral change as something that naturally follows from changed thinking. Sometimes it does. But much more often, the relationship works the other way. Behavior changes thinking. Action precedes belief. You don't think your way into a new way of living. You live your way into a new way of thinking. The loop is behavioral. The loop is the pattern of action and reaction, the specific things you do and don't do in specific types of situations, that produces outcomes that confirm the past's conclusions. To break the loop, you have to interrupt the behavior. Deliberately. Repeatedly. At the specific moment when the old pattern wants to assert itself. The first step is identification. You need to know specifically what the loop looks like in behavioral terms. Not "I have trust issues," that's the narrative level. The behavioral level looks like, when a relationship reaches a certain depth of intimacy, I create distance by becoming critical or unavailable. Or, when I am close to a significant achievement, I self-sabotage by procrastinating on the final critical step. Or, when someone challenges my authority in a group, I respond with excessive accommodation that undermines my own position. That's specific. That behavioral. That honest. Once you can see the exact behavioral expression of the loop, you can identify the intervention point. The moment just before the old behavior kicks in, the moment of choice, however brief. Because the loop runs on habit, and habits can be interrupted. Not stopped, interrupted. There is a difference. Stopping a habit requires that you never do it again, which is nearly impossible when the habit is deeply embedded. Interrupting it means creating a pause, however brief, between the trigger and the response, and using that pause to make a different choice. Men are so simple of mind, and so much dominated by their immediate needs, that a deceiver will always find someone willing to be deceived. But the man who deceives himself is the most imprisoned of all, for he carries his own jailer. That pause is everything. Neuroscience tells us that the gap between stimulus and response is where your freedom lives. The stimulus, the trigger, the situation that activates the old pattern, that is largely automatic. You cannot prevent your amygdala from firing. You cannot stop the habitual emotional response from beginning. But you can, with practice, create a gap. A moment of awareness between the trigger and the behavior. And in that gap, you can choose. The practice of creating the gap is simple to describe and demanding to implement. It starts with a single word, said internally the moment you feel the familiar pull of the old pattern. The word is notice. Not stop. Not don't. Just notice. I notice that I'm about to do the thing. I notice the familiar pull. I notice the past pattern wanting to run. And in that noticing, in that split second of conscious observation, the automatic behavior loses its automaticity. It becomes a choice. Then you make a different choice. Not a perfect choice. Not the optimal response to every complex situation. A different choice. Any choice that is not the old pattern. Even a small deviation, responding with curiosity instead of defensiveness, staying engaged instead of withdrawing, asking a question instead of making a defensive declaration, is a new data point. A small deposit in the account of a new behavioral pattern. A tiny piece of evidence that says to your brain, there is another way to respond to this situation. And with enough deposits, the new pattern becomes available. Not inevitable, but available. This is slow work. It does not feel dramatic. There is no single moment where the loop breaks and everything shifts. There is only the patient, daily, unglamorous practice of noticing the old pull and making a different choice. Again and again. Until the new choice starts to feel less effortful. Until the gap between trigger and response widens naturally. Until, one day, you look back and realize that the situation that used to reliably produce the old behavior is no longer producing it automatically. That the loop has been interrupted enough times that it has lost its momentum. That is the rewiring. That is how the past's hold on your behavior is genuinely, permanently loosened. Not by willpower. By repetition. By the consistent practice of a different response, deposited so many times that it begins to compete with, and eventually replace, the old one. Drop this in the comments. I notice the pull. I pause. And I choose differently. Part for the only revenge that works. We need to talk about the people who hurt you. Because for many of you, the past is not an abstract concept. It has a face. A name. A specific person or people whose actions cost you something real, whose betrayal, whose cruelty, whose neglect, whose choices left damage that you've been living with ever since. And the question of what to do with that, with the anger and the bitterness and the ongoing awareness of the injustice, is not a small question. It is, for many people, the central question. I want to be precise here. I am not going to tell you that you should feel no anger. Anger at genuine injustice is appropriate. It is healthy. It is part of how human beings process harm and assert their own worth. The anger is not the problem. The resentment is the problem. And the difference between anger and resentment is this: anger is acute. It is a response to a specific wrong. It rises, it is felt, it informs action, an assertion, a boundary, a departure, a consequence, and then it moves through. Resentment is anger that was never allowed to complete that cycle. Anger that had no outlet, or whose outlet was blocked, or whose justice never arrived. Anger that sat and fermented and turned into something that now lives not in response to anything happening in the present, but as a permanent feature of your internal landscape. A constant background radiation of bitterness that you carry everywhere, into every new situation, against every new person who has nothing to do with the original harm. Resentment is not a response to the past. Resentment is the past, installed as a permanent resident in your present. It is the most direct mechanism by which the person who harmed you continues to harm you, long after any direct contact has ended, long after the situation that produced the original harm is over. They are gone. And you are still being hurt by them, every day, through the resentment you're carrying on their behalf. If an injury has to be done to a man, it should be so severe that his vengeance need not be feared. But the only injury worth doing to one's past enemies is this: building a life so full, so powerful, so genuinely excellent, that the damage they caused becomes a footnote in a remarkable story. The release of resentment is not forgiveness in the conventional sense. I am not asking you to conclude that what they did was okay. It may not have been. I am not asking you to feel warmly toward them, or to maintain any relationship with them, or to grant them absolution they haven't sought or don't deserve. Those things are separate questions, and you get to answer them separately. I am asking you to do something much more strategic. To make a cold, calculating decision, the kind of decision Machiavelli would recognize immediately, about where your energy is most effectively deployed. Because your energy is finite. Your attention is finite. Your emotional bandwidth is finite. And every unit of it that goes into resentment is a unit not available for building, creating, growing, loving, achieving. The strategic case for releasing resentment is this: they took something from you once. Resentment is allowing them to take from you indefinitely. Every day that you carry it, they are still winning. The score they put on the board when they harmed you is the only score they can put there unless you keep the game running. Releasing resentment is how you end the game. It is how you walk off the field having refused to let them cost you anything more. Here is the practical work. You sit with the resentment, not to wallow in it, but to complete what was never completed. You let yourself feel the anger fully. You acknowledge, without minimizing, what was taken from you and what it cost. And then you make a formal, conscious, deliberate decision: this debt is closed. Not because it was paid, but because I am no longer willing to pay interest on someone else's debt. I am taking back the energy this resentment has been consuming. I am withdrawing my attention from this account. I am choosing to spend myself on something that can actually give me something in return. And then, and this is the part that seals the release, you direct the reclaimed energy toward building. Toward the life that makes their damage irrelevant. Toward the version of you that is so fully realized, so genuinely powerful, so authentically excellent, that the harm they caused is not erased but dwarfed. Dwarfed by what you built in its shadow. That is the only revenge worth having. And unlike resentment, it actually costs them something. Drop this in the comments: I close the debt. I take back my energy. I build. Part 5: Deciding who you are now. We have extracted intelligence. We have rewritten the narrative. We have interrupted the behavioral loop. We have released the resentment. All of this work has been clearing work, removing what the past put there that doesn't belong in your present. And clearing is necessary. But clearing is not enough. Because a cleared field, if left unplanted, does not stay cleared. Nature, and the mind, does not tolerate vacuums. Something will grow in space. The question is whether it is what you deliberately plant, or what grows back from the old roots. This is why identity revision is not optional. It is the work that makes all the other work permanent. Because if you clear the behavioral patterns but do not replace them with a new identity to operate from, the old patterns will gradually reassert themselves, because they are still the operating system. You need a new operating system. And the operating system is identity. Who you say you are. What you say is true about you. How you describe yourself in the story of your life. The identity revolution is not about becoming someone completely different. It is about becoming someone more completely yourself, the version of you that has integrated everything the past taught you, shared what the past falsely told you about your limitations, and is now operating from the full, honest, present-tense reality of who you actually are right now. This requires a specific practice that I want to walk you through carefully. It begins with an audit. You go through the language you use to describe yourself, internally and externally, and you identify every self-description that is rooted in the past rather than the present. Every I am someone who. That describes a pattern or limitation that belongs to who you were before the work you've done. Every I can't. That is built on an old failure rather than a present assessment. Every I'm not the kind of person who. That closes a door you may have decided to close in a moment of pain rather than in a moment of clarity. Before all else, be armed. Be armed with the knowledge of who you actually are, not who your worst moments told you, not who someone else decided, but who you have chosen, through deliberate action and honest self-examination, to be. For each one you find, ask the question, is this still true? Not was it true when I first started saying it, you know the answer to that. Is it still true now, given what you know, given what you've done, given what you've survived, given what you've learned? In most cases, you will find that the honest answer is, not entirely. Not in the way I've been stating it. The statement was an overreaction to a specific event, generalized into a permanent characteristic. And it hasn't been fully accurate for some time. Now replace it. Not with a fantasy, with an accurate, present tense, honest description. Not, I am someone who always fails in relationships, but I am someone who has made serious mistakes in relationships and has a specific, clear understanding of what I need to do differently. Not, I am someone who isn't good with money, but I am someone who has had a difficult and unexamined relationship with money, who now understands the specific patterns that have driven that, and who is building new ones. The new description is honest. It acknowledges the history, but it places you in the present, actively doing something with that history, rather than permanently defined by it. This new language is not just semantic. It is behavioral. Because the descriptions we use for ourselves are instructions. They tell our minds how to respond in situations that relate to those descriptions. Change the description, make it honest, present tense, active, and the instructions change. The behavior follows. The identity revolution is not a single event. It is a sustained practice of noticing when you speak or think from the old identity, and choosing the new description instead. Again and again. With patience. With the understanding that identity, like behavior, changes through repetition rather than through resolution. Through the accumulated weight of 1,000 small choices to describe yourself as the person you are now rather than the person you were. Eventually, and this happens faster than you might expect when the other work has been done, the new identity starts to feel more true than the old one. Not because you forced it. Because it is more true. Because you have been living it. Because the evidence is accumulating. Because the person you've been showing up as, consistently, in the work you've done and the choices you've made and the patterns you've interrupted, that person is real. That person exists. And they deserve to be named. Name them. Drop this in the comments, I am who I have chosen to become. And I am becoming more of that every day. Part 6: Protecting your new self from the old world. You have done the internal work. You have extracted the intelligence, rewritten the narrative, interrupted the loop, released the resentment, revised the identity. And in many ways, the hardest part is behind you. But there is a dimension of this work that is external, and if you neglect it, it can undo everything the internal work has built. Your environment. The physical spaces you inhabit. The people you spend your time with. The conversations you have regularly. The stories about you that are being told by others, in your presence and without it. These are not neutral factors. They are forces that push on the new identity you are building, and many of them push in the direction of the old one. Other people have a model of who you are. That model was built from their experience of you over time, mostly experience of the old version. The version before the work. And those models do not update automatically when you change. They persist. They influence how people speak to you, what they expect from you, what roles they cast you in, what stories they tell about you. And when you're surrounded by people operating from a model of who you used to be, there is a constant subtle pressure to perform that old version. To be who they expect. To fit the shape of their picture of you. This is not malicious, in most cases. It is simply how social systems work. People use their existing models of others to navigate interactions efficiently. But for someone in the process of genuine transformation, those persistent old models are a genuine obstacle. They create an environment in which the new identity must fight for oxygen against the well-established ecology of the old one. There is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success, than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. Because the innovator has for enemies all those who have done well under the old conditions. Machiavelli wrote that about political change. It applies with exact precision to personal change. The people who did well under the old conditions, who benefited from the version of you who was more available, more accommodating, more predictable, more easily managed, will, without necessarily knowing they're doing it, resist the new conditions. The new you. Because the new you requires something different from them. Requires that they update their model, adjust their expectations, engage differently. And that is work. Work most people will resist until they have no other option. This means you need to be intentional about your environment in a way that most people are not. You need to assess honestly which of the people in my regular life are operating from an accurate, current model of who I am. Which of them know me as I am now, or are genuinely curious about who I am becoming? And which of them are invested, consciously or not, in the version of me that belongs to the past? With the first group, move toward them. Invest in those relationships. Those are the people who will support the new identity rather than erode it. Those are the people whose expectations of you are calibrated to your present self, not your past self. Those relationships are assets. With the second group, you have choices. You can have honest conversations about who you are now and who you are becoming, not as a declaration, not as a defense, but as an invitation. Some people will respond to that invitation with genuine curiosity and update their model. Those people are worth keeping close. Others will be unable or unwilling to update. They will keep pulling you back toward the version of you they know. With those people, you reduce your exposure, not necessarily permanently, not necessarily dramatically, but deliberately. You spend less time in the spaces where the old identity is the expected performance. And if necessary, if there are environments or relationships that are so thoroughly organized around the old version of you that presence in them consistently undermines your work, you consider whether those environments or relationships are compatible with the life you are building. You make deliberate choices about your exposure to them. Not out of anger. Out of self-respect. Out of the understanding that the new identity you are building needs room to breathe, space to develop, time to become solid before it is subjected to the weight of sustained opposition. Protect the new self. Not defensively. Strategically. The way you would protect any investment you've made significant effort to build. You would not build a new structure and then immediately expose it to forces designed to tear it down. Give it time. Give it space. Give it the right conditions to become something that can eventually withstand anything. Drop this in the comments: I protect the new self. I choose environments that know my future. Part 7: Living Without Yesterday. We have covered the full method. Every piece of the work, from the first act of intelligence extraction to the protection of the new identity in your external environment. And now I want to bring all of it together into the synthesis. The picture of what this looks like when it's working. When all the pieces are integrated. When the past is finally, genuinely, in the past. Because this is what you are working toward. Not a perfect life. Not a life without difficulty or setback or loss. But a specific quality of relationship to those things. A way of moving through the world, and through adversity, that is fundamentally different from the way most people move. A way that is lighter. More agile. More genuinely present to what's actually happening right now, rather than filtered through the residue of what happened then. The person who has done this work, who has genuinely broken the past's hold, moves through the world in a particular way. When a painful memory surfaces, they receive it differently. Instead of the familiar weight, the familiar pull backward, there is something more like recognition. An acknowledgement of an old signal that no longer carries the same charge. They can see the memory clearly, can feel its historical weight, without being consumed by it. Because the intelligence has been extracted. Because the narrative has been rewritten. Because the identity it once anchored has been updated. The memory is real. It is just no longer operational. When they encounter a new challenge that resembles a past failure, they respond differently. The old loop wants to run, the old conclusion wants to be drawn, the old protective pattern wants to engage. And they feel that pull. But they are no longer unconscious of it. They notice it. They pause. They assess the present situation on its actual merits, with the intelligence of the past informing their assessment without the fear of the past controlling their response. They bring everything the past taught them to bear on the new challenge, and they bring it without the baggage. The intelligence without the wound. Fortune shows her power when there is no organized strength to resist her. Wisdom is building that strength in the calm before the storm, so that when fortune moves against you, you move through it, not under it. When someone wrongs them, they respond proportionately to the actual present offense rather than to the accumulated weight of every past offense that resembled it. They set appropriate limits. They communicate those limits clearly. They enforce them with consistency. And they do all of this without the amplification of old resentment making every new slight feel catastrophic. The new situation gets its own response. Clean. Calibrated. Present. When something is genuinely lost, when grief is appropriate, when something worth mourning is gone, they grieve. Fully. Without rushing. Without performing strength they don't feel. And they emerge from that grief carrying what it gave them, the clarification of what matters, the knowledge of what they're capable of surviving, without being defined by it. The grief runs its course. And they continue. Not because they have hardened. Because they have become more genuinely capable of the kind of openness that grief requires, more capable, not less, because they have learned to trust their own resilience. This is what no regrets actually looks like. Not the absence of a difficult past. Not the absence of genuine mistakes. Not a cleaned-up, repackaged version of your history that makes everything seem purposeful in retrospect. It is the earned, functional, daily reality of being a person whose past has given everything it has to give, every lesson, every scar, every hard-won piece of intelligence, and is no longer authorized to take anything in return. That is freedom. Real, sustainable, unglamorous, daily freedom. The kind that was built rather than given. The kind that persists not because everything is fine but because you have developed the internal resources to engage with whatever isn't fine without being diminished by it. The kind that makes the quality of your present life genuinely independent of the content of your past. You built this. Through the work of this video and the last one. Through the honesty of the diagnosis and the sustained effort of the method. Through the willingness to look at what was holding you and the courage to begin, systematically, to put it down. The past made you. Every scar, every failure, every loss, every lesson, every moment of surviving what seemed unsurvivable, it all went into who you are right now. And who you are right now is enough. More than enough. Equipped with precisely the intelligence your specific history produced. Hardened in precisely the places your specific journey required. Ready for precisely what comes next, because what comes next requires exactly what you have. The past is done. Not forgotten. Done. Finished. Complete. You extracted everything it had to offer. You are armed with it. And you are walking forward. That is the only way to kill the past. Not by erasing it. By using it completely and then setting it free. Drop this in the comments: my past is complete. My present is mine. My future is being built right now. 2 videos. 1 complete journey. From seeing the prison clearly, understanding every lock, every hinge, every mechanism, to building the door. To walking through it. To stand on the other side with the full weight of your past in your hands, not on your back. As tools, not chains. This is the work Machiavelli pointed to, not in the language of healing or self-help, but in the language of power and freedom and the ruthless, clear-eyed refusal to be governed by anything that is no longer real. The past is not real. Not anymore. What is real is here. What is real is now. What is real is the person who survived everything they survived and chose, deliberately, consciously, with full understanding of what it cost, to stop being defined by it. That person is you. Today. Right now. Not eventually. If both of these videos hit something real, subscribe. Share them with someone who needs to hear this. Because this content exists for exactly one purpose, to give people the tools to stop living in yesterday and start building tomorrow. Drop your final affirmation in the comments. Tell me what you are leaving behind. Tell me what you are walking into. Those comments are not just affirmations, they are commitments. Make them. Mean them. Hold yourself to them.